not bad. But it's not great, but it's not bad. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Rifle Chair YouTube channel. VOMZ Optical and Mechanical Plant, also known as VOMZ. And today we are going to be looking at this optical sight. This is made by that company, the VOMZ Optical and Mechanical Plant. This one here is a World War II vintage PU optical sight. This is a PU sniper rifle. This here is a newly manufactured replica of that PU sniper optic. There are some fundamental differences, and I think that you can tell right away simply by looking at the two. There's a big difference. We've got the manual here, and in the manual I can tell you that this manual covers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different optical sights, and you can see this one here has been underlined. This is the model we're talking about, the P 3.5 by 20C. I don't know what the C stands for. This is a lovely little manual. However, I can tell you that it is all in Russian. Probably can't see that, but it's all written in Russian. There is an interesting thing here. It has been certified, stamped, and dated March the 26th, 2013. So this is just over a year old. This is a brand new scope. Okay, so I bought it brand new. Comes in this fancy schmancy box. Again, I think this manual is designed to cover off a number of different models of VOMZ. This is the Pilad, or Pilad scope. P-I-L-A-D, Pilad. And we're going to talk about this after I close that door. The Pilad VOMZ scope. First, a little bit about the company. VOMZ Optical and Mechanical Plant, we'll just call them VOMZ, V-O-M-Z. They produce day and night sighting devices for armored vehicles. They produce objective lenses, which they sell. They produce hunting sights, and this is advertised as a hunting sight. They make binoculars, night vision instruments, telescopes, magnifiers, pretty much anything optical. But it's more than that. They manufacture articles for everyday life. They even advertise items for agriculture and machine. They're well immersed in the machine building industry. They have large military contracts that they serve optical systems to. Fire control systems, anti-aircraft sights, night gunner's sights, PT-800 converters, and so on. So electronic and thermal imaging products for the defense industry and for civilian use, like this one. The VOMZ manufacturing facility is based in Vologda in the Russian Federation. And the company was founded in 1994, so it's not an old company. It's not an old company at all. So I've been testing this sight a lot because, as you can see, I've got this built onto my M305 here, and I think you'll understand simply by looking at this rifle as to why I'm attracted to the use of this optical sight. Most of the sights that I've seen people used are very, very large, with a large bell objective. The scope has to sit very high on the rifle, and because the eyepiece is generally quite large, you have to have these scopes way up above the rifle. And my philosophy for an optical sight for this rifle is one that is very small, one that can be kept very close to the rifle, so you don't need to have any kind of modification to the buttstock here, so you can maintain a cheek weld. This is actually, even though the scope is so low on the rifle, I'm still only getting a hybrid chin and cheek weld. So it's kind of right in between. We'll show some pictures of me shooting the rifle. You'll see what I mean. But it's still quite comfortable to shoot. You're not overextending your head to get a good sight picture. So this works. This works. These scopes, the VOMZ scope here, has a non-centered reticle. And what that means is when you make turret adjustments, your field of view does not change, but the reticle does move. The reticle moves, but the field of view does not. Any of your centered reticles, it's the field of view that moves, while the reticle stays centered in the middle of the field of view. These scopes do not. And I think that there's a certain amount of dissatisfaction from North American and Western shooters because we're very accustomed to using a centered reticle. These do not. And so for that reason, these scopes are not terribly popular with the Western shooting community. However, I have been shooting these rifles. I'll safety check. I did it already, but it's always good to do. I have been shooting these rifles for a very long time, and I have become quite accustomed to the non-centered reticle. So, what's the big deal? Well, there is no real big deal. What I can tell you, the non-centered reticle helps you in many ways. First of all, you'll know, based on the distance that you're trying to shoot at, whether you think your sight setting is actually on based on a graphical representation of your field of view. You'll be able to see that your aiming point is off. Therefore, maybe you need to look at the turrets and double check your sight setting. Because if you've got your sight setting for 400 meters, but you're shooting at 100, you'll be able to see exactly where your aiming point is off, just by looking in the viewfinder. That's a real benefit. How many people do you know have actually engaged long-range targets and forgot to adjust their scope? Well, you can see that the scope needs adjustment when you look through it, because the reticle is, it's off. Additionally, it's very similar. The non-centered reticle is very similar to shooting with open sights, and I'll tell you what I mean. If you're printing to the right and you're shooting with open sights, you move your front sight to the right in the direction of which your group is located. So if you're aiming right there and your group is right there, you move your front sight from here to there. Now you're zeroed. The non-centered reticle is exactly the same. So if you're used or you're accustomed to shooting with open sights, you will do very well with one of these scopes. It does take a little while to get used to. Now let's talk about these scopes a little bit. You will notice that this VOMZ scope, this PU scope, is not an exact replica of the original PU scope. It's very similar, but is not. For example, over here, your windage knob is on the left side of the body of the scope, whereas on the VOMZ scope, your windage knob is on the right side of the body of the scope. I prefer the original PU sniper system because when you're shooting, your left hand is free to make adjustments, and you can make them very quickly with your left hand. Whereas if you're right-handed, it is very cumbersome to get in here and change your shooting position, modify it where your hands are, and make the sight adjustment for windage. So I prefer the knob being on the left side, as the original PU scope, as you see here, shows. Additionally, other things to pay attention to. These adjustment turrets on the VOMZ scope are extremely difficult to adjust. I don't know if through the manufacturing process they did not grease these, because there are grease inside these turrets for the original PU sniper. It feels like there's no grease inside these turrets. These are very easy to adjust. These are not. You gotta grip them 3 to 4 times harder just to make them, just to move them. Which, when through testing this scope, in winter wet conditions with wet gloves and wet hands, these get to be very slippery. They are tactile, but the surface area is very, very small for you to grip. They are both similar in that when you need to zero the scope, I don't know if you can see this because the thing's fairly high up, but we'll just zoom in a bit. Okay, right here. These screws.
Don't want to tighten these too much.
Okay, you back them off just a little bit. Okay, do not, when you retighten them, you be very, very careful not to tighten them too much. You back these up, maybe 1 or 2 turns, and then this dial will spin. Okay, and then you zero it with the indicator here on the scope so that you're zeroed, and then you retighten the screws. Very, very simple. And the PU sniper rifle is the same way. Now, observations. Clarity of optics between these two scopes are very, very similar. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they're pretty much the same quality of image. They are not a great image. I'm seeing a little bit of silhouetting of the reticle in this scope, whereas in this one I do not see silhouetting. And what I mean by that is it looks like there's another image of the aiming point, kind of like a shadow of the image when you're looking through the optical sight here. I do not have that problem with this scope. This scope is slightly yellowed from basically 70 years of existence. This one here does not. So in that regard, this is probably a little bit better for light transmission, but for quality of optics I prefer the original PU. But they're very similar. There's not a lot of difference. But because of the reticle shadowing in the VOMZ, I do prefer the PU for quality of image. Materials. The Russian PU scope is, I'd say, probably 50% heavier than the VOMZ, which feels like it's constructed of aluminum. Okay, this here feels like it's all steel. So it's a much heftier scope. This one feels at least 50% heavier. That doesn't really have any impact so far as quality. This is an observation. Construction materials. Now, do I recommend this scope? No, I do not. I paid $150 retail value for this scope, plus shipping and taxes. These scopes will retail for about $200 to $300. They are worth that much money. Is this scope worth $150? No, it is not. And I'll tell you why. Simply because these turrets are so difficult to adjust. I noticed something very interesting when I was shooting this under, I was trying to adopt the principles of surgical precision in deliberate stages, off bags, trying to squeeze as much accuracy out of this rifle as I could. And I was grossly disappointed. The VOMZ scope, when I was making adjustments with the windage knob here, when I was making adjustments, I could see the aiming point move in a vertical fashion. It would go up if I wanted to add windage to the left, and it would go down if I added windage to the right. So mechanically, there's something wrong with this scope coming straight out of the factory. And as Nut and Fancy will say, the truth will set you free. And I am not in the position to recommend this scope to absolutely anyone who wants to make regular turret changes. If you want to use this scope to do nothing but have a static sight picture where you're not going to be making any adjustments whatsoever to the turrets, then this is a rock solid scope. I had no impact to, or I should say no variation of the point of impact that I was able to measure by using the scope, and I've put in the neighborhood of around 300 rounds through this rifle with this scope on it now. So it's quite an ammunition investment that I've made in the testing for this scope. About 300 rounds. And it seemed to hold. However, simply because I can make an adjustment to the windage and the aiming point will make a vertical adjustment, I'm sorry, but the scope does not pass the test now simply because of that one thing. I would have likely kept the scope on this rifle if it didn't do that. If it wasn't for that one factor. So I am disappointed. Do I recommend the scope? No, I do not recommend the scope. It behoves me to report this to you guys because my reputation is important, and I have a conscience. I'm not going to tell you guys this is a great scope when it's not. So there you go, folks. I don't really know what else to tell you about it. You know, it's one of the problems with having a YouTube channel where you actually do product reviews from time to time is that you do a product review. If it gets a negative report, then you try to sell it. Nobody wants to buy it. But there you go. There you go. What I am going to do, however, because this is such a beautiful system, and I do have the scope zeroed. I've got these are Burris tactical mounts, 1 inch by the way, and these are extremely rotund. This thing can take quite a while without losing a zero. I am going to replace this with an original PU sniper optic, simply because I'm such a firm believer in this optical sight and the appropriateness for the M14 rifle. That's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed the review. We'll throw some moving footage of the rifle in action with this scope on it at different ranges. I've had fairly good success out to about 400 meters. However, still a little bit of frustration when it came to adjusting the turrets in wet winter conditions. The tube is completely waterproof. However, the lenses are not treated for fog. There is no anti-fog treatment to the lenses of these scopes, at least not this model. Are all VOMZ products inferior? I don't know. This is the only VOMZ optical sight I have ever seen and tested. Are these sights good in the field? Absolutely. I've had these scopes out to about minus 40 degrees in the back of a pickup truck, and when I brought it inside a warm house, the internals did not fog. The external lenses fogged, but not the internals. I can't say the same thing for this because I've not had it out in weather that cold. However, I suspect it is purged, nitrogen filled or something to that effect, and that the seals are good. The seals on this one are definitely good, even though it's an older scope. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching this episode of the Rifle Chair YouTube channel, and as always, Maple Leaf up.